Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting us to share on the situation in Manipur, but also in the context of the heavily contested geopolitical competition in South Asia. Um, First, I would like to introduce Manipur is one of the state in India, in the northeast part of India, which is bordering Myanmar. And probably that also explain a little bit of the context of conflict, ongoing conflict in Manipur. If we look, I think Manipur is much in the news of late because of the ethnic conflict within two communities in Manipur. But then I think it's also good to remind the contextualize that Manipur there has been a prolonged conflict in Manipur because of the ongoing self-determination movement by several armed groups. And of course, this is also a conflict-prone area because, and also because of the military response on the part of the government of India. So there are multiple emergency law, the Special Powers Act, and a couple of other legislation. And there has been prolonged concern around the human rights, issues in Manipur. Issues of extrajudicial execution and multiple cases of violation, enforced disappearances, and violence against women. So it's been a prolonged pattern, yeah, and of course, issues around impunity. Perpetrated from those involved in the counterinsurgency in Manipur. So that's the context. But then it's also good to contextualize the recent conflict in Manipur also, because it's good that we also try to position Manipur because it's right in the border of Myanmar, and the Myanmar is already a heavily contested and conflict area again, because of the very contestation between the different powerful countries, the capitalist or imperialist countries, and I think Azra was just referring to how there's massive competition between China, US, and then its allies in not just in Middle East, but also in South Asia, but also in Southeast Asia, and I think all of these are having a direct implications on our part of the world. And where I'm in Manipur, this is very close to the Bay of Bengal, and now there has been an increased competition between especially between China and USA, because now China is trying to reach the Bay of Bengal, trying to reach the Indian Ocean. And in fact, it's been coming up with series of multiple infrastructure projects under its Belt and Road Initiative. So you have the CPEC in Pakistan, you have the CIMEC, this China Myanmar Economic Corridor in Myanmar, and then of course there are other multiple Belt and Road initiatives in Middle East. And all of this that includes not just the infrastructure, and then of course it also includes ports and several other infrastructure. And I think these are something which countries like US, India, and a couple of other European countries, are quite skeptical about. And then so the entire strategy is all about containing China in the sense, and so that also led to a context whereby there has been an increased cooperation, not just at the economic level, but also even at the military or even at the security level. So you could see a range of military cooperation, a range of or military exercise, not just in Bay of Bengal, but all across region. And I think this is also a context which is very much impacting our part of the world as well, And then if you see what is happening in Myanmar, so there is a lot of push for democracy, human rights. And I just want to confer with what Azra just recently shared, on the very notion of democracy or the very notion of human rights that's been pursued aggressively. But then the same question is like, where is human rights in Pakistan, in Palestine? Where is human rights in this kind of humanitarian, in this kind of situation where there is massive humanitarian crisis, and there is a massive impunity. So bringing back to in our context is there is also a fact that there is an ongoing counterinsurgency operation. And also for India, it is not just a China's Belt and Road initiative, but also because India has a prolonged conflict with China, border tension, and in fact there was a war in 1962, direct competition. So for countries like India, there is an additional worry that China is surrounding India, or and the kind of military infrastructure built up along the India's border. I think that's also being a prolonged worry for India. So I think that's also one of the reasons why it tries to step up its alliance and allies, and all kind of cooperation with US especially. And I think that's also precisely one of the reasons why India is kind of aligning with Israel in this in this Gaza humanitarian crisis. No, and that also explains why India is also. I think it's also good to acknowledge the fact that there a lot of the cooperations with India is undertaken with not just with the US but also with Israel, and I think a lot of it's involved like not just economic cooperation, but also the security cooperation, the military cooperation. I think it is also something that is used not just only to check China, but also I think in many of the counterinsurgency within India. So there are some places that Azra mentioned in the north of India, in the northeast part of India, the central part. So there are, so because of those kind of cooperation in the economic area, and also in the counterterrorism, and also in efforts to contain China. So that is something that impacts not just the dimension of conflict, but also in causing humanitarian crisis. No, and what is obvious in the Palestine in the case is the scale of humanitarian crisis, and the lack of sensitivity to human rights, which many of the Western countries are actually pursuing. And also the nature of impunity, the level of impunity, the level of and we are witnessing that in our context as well. In Manipur, what we are seeing is in the recent conflict and also the prolonged conflict, there's an increased attack on civilians, increased attack on village. And so there is a lot of and right now we are reeling on humanitarian crisis, massive displacement among the community, and there are direct attacks on villages, on the civilians, on population. And I think a lot of concern right now in Manipur is there are a lot of questions. Ever since the recent conflict happened in Manipur, India actually stepped up its military or security deployment to control the violence. But then instead of controlling the violence, actually the attacks and also the violence have actually increased. And I think that's a big concern, and also a lot of question as to why the violence has increased or has not stopped until now, despite the heavy deployment of its own security. And I think so. Part of the reason is part of the indication, and a part of the response to that. A lot of the intellectuals and media and also narratives in Manipur and also even within the region also hints to the geopolitical factor, hints to India's own counterinsurgency program. And there are a lot of worries in recent times that certain countries, a lot of countries are also increasingly relying on mercenary and proxy forces, to serve its geopolitical interests, economic interests. And so, and I think that's also one of the fear that we suspect, that because I'm not naming any community or in this context because it's quite sensitive as well. And so there are a lot of concern that many of the nation states are actually relying on mercenaries or proxy forces, to serve its interests. Because by doing that, it also serves several other purposes. So, and that is something that we are seeing. And then, and what we are clearly evident is quite similar to what is happening in Palestine is also, for counterinsurgency purpose, you completely ignore the humanitarian, crisis or humanitarian values. And like what we are seeing in our case is is also what Azra just said. The basic principle of democracy, the basic Western liberal values, I think those are losing its relevance in our context, whereby the states are more relying on more intense militarization or military response, in serving its own security or economic or other geopolitical interests. And I think that's a big concern in our part of the world. And what is clearly obvious is. Even certain communities or certain regions can be sacrificed just to serve the interest of those dominant imperialist countries. And also a big bit of concern is despite all this, we are also seeing the role of the US is quite, and also many of the European countries are quite alarming in our context, no? Because what is unique in our case is also because the relationship with the conflict in Myanmar, with the conflict in Manipur, because there is an overflow of people with arms, and also and also the refugees coming from Myanmar over the period of several decades, no, and which has intensified in recent years, and that also led to another dimension of conflict in the region. And the push for countries like US to promote democracy, to foster democracy in Myanmar, for example, and that also led to a spillover impact, because what is clear is US also comes up with its own bill to support the democratic forces in Myanmar. But in that process, they also provide all kind of support, military, non-military aid, and those further led to complication of conflict in the region. So, what is happening in our context is a blend of counterterrorism, geopolitical endeavor, and then the spillover impact of the conflict in Myanmar. All of this has certain dimension of this direct support and involvement of countries like US, several European countries, and of course many of these are also providing arms, not just to or military aid, not just to India, but also to neighboring countries, and also to several forces within Myanmar. So those are what that actually complicates the nature of conflict in our part of the world. And in conclusion, I would emphasize that the nation states and many of the countries that should actually focus on promoting the rights and fundamental freedom of its own citizens. It should focus on recognizing the rights of communities, and it should stop all kind of violence, and it should stop, focusing on serving its own geopolitical interests, by sacrificing undermining the rights of the marginalized and oppressed communities. So with that said, I would like to end my sharing, and thank you very much.